Right, so once you have downloaded this rig and open it up, these are the following controls that we want to look at. Okay, so we have the arrows, we have the disc, and we have the tail, right? So let's look at the arrow first, and the arrow is called ball anim. Now if you look at the channel box to your right hand side, you notice that your usual channels, some of them are missing, right? So we have our translate, we have our rotate, but it doesn't have scale, it doesn't have the visibility. So what the rigger does, right, is that he's foolproofing the rig for you, meaning that things that are not supposed to be animated, right, he hide them away from the animator. Okay, so what we have learned in the first 2 weeks, creating the joints, and then the following week we did the controls, right? We did not actually do this final portion, which is to customize your channel box and to make sure that we hide away things that are not seen. So these are a little bit more advanced, okay, so it is considered more intermediate, so we're not gonna touch on those yet. But if you're interested, right, you can actually have a look at it. Okay, so we can translate and we can rotate. So let's just take the arrow and let's move it to see what it does. So for moving, you notice that the arrow moves the entire model, right? And for rotation, you notice that it rotates everything except for the disc. So this is something you want to keep in mind, okay? And it also means that to me, it's not considered really great because we would expect the disc to rotate with the object. Alright, so that it's easy to place your character around. So this is the first flaw that we have seen already today. Okay, so if let's say you're working with someone, you could always give a feedback. Oh, okay, can you fix this for me? Alright, now let's try to scale. So you notice that because scale is hidden, right? Your scale tool is also being grayed out and you can't do anything about it. Okay, so as you can see, when you lock something, right, the animators can't break your rig anymore. Okay, next one, let's go to the disc. So once again, the disc has a set of stuff. So usually I like to select the controller and then straight away look at the channel box. So you don't have to kind of test and see what it can do. You just straight away can see everything over here. So you can move, you can rotate, and you can stretch. So let's try the stretch, okay? So select the name, stretch, and instead of keying in numbers manually, we're going to use a hidden slider. So if you middle mouse, click in your viewport, and drag left and right, you can see your ball stretching. Correct? So select the name, middle mouse, which is your scroll wheel, click and drag. Alright? So you need to drag sideways according to the arrows in your cursor. You can see it stretch. Of course, let's try to move the disc as well. So let's try and move it up and down, and you can see straight away, right? The stretching is being affected by the disc. Yeah, so by playing with your rig, right, it sort of gives you some idea of what it can do, right? Now if you rotate it, okay, it rotates the squashing, right, basically. Alright, so this disc eventually is called the ball squash and anim. So it's there to help you animate the squashing and the position of it. Okay, now let's move on to the tail. So the tail itself has bones. Now how do you turn on the bones? Turn on the X-ray bones here. You know, when you rig, right, you have this X-ray bones. that we use. Okay, so this will turn on the bones that you see over here. Now, if you try to select the bones, right, you are actually selecting the controller, not the bone itself. So the animator has done a great job in locking the bones. So you're not really selecting the bones, but you're selecting the controller. See this guy? So if you try and click on the controller, it says FK tail 1 anim, right? If you try and click on the bone, it says the same thing. So essentially, you are actually selecting the controller. Okay, so not to worry if you select the bones and worry that you're not actually selecting the correct person. Alright, the rigger has already done his job. And if you try to select the first bone, you notice you totally cannot select at all. So it's kind of locked it down for you. Okay, now let's click on the very first circle. It's a bit hard to see. There's actually two items at the start. Okay, there's a sphere and there's a circle here at the start of the tail. So let's click on the circle. It's called tail anim. And let's try to rotate. So by rotating it, you can see the entire tail follows, right? And if you click on the second ring, the second bone moves, right? The third ring, the third bone moves. The final ring, the final bone moves. So this is actually FK tail, alright, forward kinematics. The bones follow the hierarchy, right? The parent to the child and so on and so forth. So the children will always follow the parent, the FK. Okay, let's select on the sphere, the inner one. Again, you can rotate it in the channel box, so rotation, and you notice something a bit strange happening. The child is not following, right? In fact, it's kind of stretching out like that. So this is what we call the IK, the inverse kinematic. Okay, and we have a IK spline. So we learned the IK legs, right, last week. This is actually IK spline. Right, so whereby you use it to control it like a snake. Okay, so we have the first point called tail base anim, and the last point is here, the circle here. We have tail end anim. And tail end, right, you can rotate, it works the same way, and you can move. So by moving, right, you are stretching the tail. So this is actually a stretchy rig. And you notice when I stretch, the bones did not follow. This is the FK bones, right? Did not follow it. So this is something to take note of, okay? When you do IK, the FK did not follow. So you might want to consider, do I want to animate this, a stretchy tail, or do I want a bendy tail? And how do I combine both if I want both versions? Who should I animate first? The FK first or the IK first? Right? So think about that. Okay. Now, last thing to take note of is, remember we talked about the joint orientation, a very chim topic that I think you guys might not be able to understand. Remember when we try to rotate the fingers? We want to make sure that we can select every finger and rotate them together. And when we do that, all of them should clench, right? So we are using the same axis to clench our hand. So let's look at the tail to see if the orientation of the joints, right, is working as expected. So I'm going to select 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to try and rotate downwards, okay? So when I rotate down, you can, up or down, you can see my tail is not moving together as expected. So by moving down, you expect the tail to curl. By moving up, you expect it to curl up, right? By somehow moving sideways, even though I'm using the up and down rotation. Let's see that. Okay, so this means, right, that the orientation is not great in this model. So you might want to take note of that. And let's see what is wrong, okay? So I'm just going to rotate one more time, and let's analyze the problem with our rotation. Okay, so the first rotation here, we are rotating in the z-axis. There are some numbers there, correct? The second controller, also z-axis. The third controller, also, oh yeah, actually all of them are z-axis. Because I rotated them in the z-axis. Okay, my bad. Okay, let's reset. 0. Let's do it again. I want to rotate upwards, okay? So up, one by one, up, and up. Now we analyze, alright? So the first one, yeah, rotate X, right? That could be why the tail was spinning that way. Number 2, Z. So it's correct. Number 3, Z is correct. Number 4, Z. Also correct, right? So in other words, what was causing the issue? The first one. First one was not rotated well. So when you animate, how to work over this issue, right? Is that we select the last 3, 1, 2, 3, and we curl the tail. See, it works just as expected. And the last one, you want to rotate it on its own, separately. So you don't meet that kind of weird like rotation issue. Okay, so this is one thing you need to remember about this rig, is this part. It's rotating at a different angle compared to the rest. Okay, so now that we are done with our rig, let's also learn to see how we can show and hide stuff before we start animating. So first thing, let's look at what display layers the rigger has given us. Okay, so we have our TAD geo layer. So that one will show and hide your geometry. The letter P here means hide on playback. When you play back your animation, if you click the P, right, it's going to disappear when you play the animation. See that? Okay, so that's P. So let's say you play your animation, you don't want to see your bones, right? You can press P and it will hide the bones during playback. So this is, the bones layer is TAD anim layer. If you're not sure, you can press the V key and it will show and hide your stuff. Right? So make sure your geometry layer is set to reference R, so that you cannot select it anymore. Alright, so under your geometry layer, over here the third box, make sure that you're under R for reference. Alright, so now if you try and select your object, nothing happens. If you disable the R, you can select your mesh by accident, right? So if you accidentally animate or move it or whatever, you know, you can essentially break your rig altogether. So make sure you cannot select it. Okay, next thing to actually nothing much, but I just want to add something extra. So let's say if you do not have any display layers, okay, your rigger did not do a job to give you stuff here. How can you work around it? So we have all these guys up here, and we haven't really talked about them at all, right? So the first, maybe we go through all these sections in your top menu. We have our menu set, right, in order to hide and show the different menus. We have our file system to open, close files and save. We have, let's skip over the center. We have the magnets, which is the snap tool. So if you press the V key or the S key, V key or X key, right, sometimes you hold too long, it will jam up the buttons and you'll be stuck. So if you notice something is snapping, right, one of your snap tool is activated. Okay, I'm not sure why or what is the keyboard shortcut that when you press V for too long or whatever combination, right, it actually locks down this guy. So if you know what's the shortcut, you can just you can let me know, right? So we have snap to grid, the X key. We have snap to point, the V key. And then of course we have snap to curve, snap to other things, alright? And then we have something hidden here, the triangle. These things, we will not talk about it, so I'm just going to hide it. We have our render settings. Remember when we were doing for portfolio, right? We rendered some stuff here. And then we've got all the different editors that we open up. The channel box, the attribute editor. These are the buttons here. So what are these guys in the middle? If you don't see them, right, it's probably because they are hidden away. The triangle. So make sure you open it up. Okay, these are your selection constraints. Meaning, right, it allows you to choose what you want to select in your scene. So let's say you want to select a geometry only, right? So you can click on the arrow, choose all objects off, so turn off everything, and then just select geometry. So now, right, you can select nothing but the geometry. See that? I can click on all these points, right? Nothing gets selected. Only the geometry. Okay, I'm going to go back to reference. If you want to select only the controllers, you can turn on this guy. And if you want to select only the bones, you can turn on this one. So as an animator, we don't animate bones, okay? We just animate the controllers. And in the case of the squash and stretch, right, it's actually a geometry, which is what I found out earlier today. This guy is a geometry here, which is very strange, okay, because we don't use geometry for controllers at all. So this is again another rigging flaw. I feel that it shouldn't be there. So click on the geometry and you should be able to select the disc. So by right, we separate geometry from controller so that your animators don't accidentally animate a geometry that is not supposed to. Okay, so with that, let's restart our scene. So I'm going to open up the same scene again. Okay, so this is our default. And shall we do a save as? Let's call this 01 key pose. Make sure you save as Maya ASCII. So the first thing we want to do is to focus on the extremities of the action, right? And probably the path, the motion path. So the first thing I want to do is to set keyframes on every 5 frames. Alright, so every 5 frames, we keyframe one time. So it's a very like tidy and fixed interval. Okay, so let's set our animation first, our frames per second, to the game's version. And let's make sure that all these things are set up nicely before we start to keyframe. Now let's go to this small running man here at the bottom of your window. Okay, click on him and let's adjust the FPS. Now, do you have any idea what your game FPS is? 60, 30. 60, 30. Yeah. Okay, so 60 is like your PC version, right? If you have a very strong computer, the best one, okay, you play at 60 FPS, correct? For mobile phones and for like medium range computers or older computers, we use 30. Okay, so there's no correct or wrong answers, but these two, right, they are your usual ones. And if you scroll down, right, I was just like curious today. I decided to scroll down. I realized they have 48,000 FPS.
Like we can't see more than 60 FPS.
Yeah, like who uses 48,000, right? I mean, if someone online knows what 48,000 is used for, I'll be happy to know. But I would think, right, it's for like scientific calculations, for physics and things like that.
But why would you need that for Maya?
Because Maya can be used for hospitalization, hospital visualization. Yeah, for those health things, like, you know, all your red blood cells go through the veins and all those things, right? They're all done in 3D, right? And they are called nano something. Nano something. Yeah, nanotech or nano I don't know, okay? But anyway, in fact, right, Maya nowadays is used more and more in the healthcare system already. Like, you know, your eyeball surgery, how everything is like eyeball surgery, everything is very precise. The cutting, the measurement is very precise, right? It's done in Maya. Okay, so of course there are other 3D programs that can do it, but what I'm saying is that the healthcare system, right, is coming on board the 3D platform. So I presume for the 8,000 is probably some scientific thing that they were doing. Okay, we are not touching that. It's crazy. So 60 is for PC. Let's do 30. 24 is for animation. So if you're doing like TV series, right, 24 frames per second. Okay, if you are doing film, I think it's around 24, 30, yeah, depending on the country. Okay, so 30 frames per second for mobile. Playback speed, make sure you're looking at playback speed times 1. Okay, you don't want to play every frame, you will see everything being played very fast or very slow depending on computer speed. Your com will force the program to play frame by frame. So if it cannot cope, right, it's going to play very slow. So let's do times 1. And of course, how do you know if your com is good or bad, right? Use the play every frame and then use times 1 and see the difference. If it speeds up, right, if times 1 speed up means your com is slow. In other words, when you play every frame, it's very slow, right? It's slower than real time. It means your com is lagging. Okay, if play every frame is faster than real time, means your com is performing very well. Right? That's one way to kind of check.
Which one is the average one?
Average? No, it's either play every frame or times 1. Yeah, so it's either in real time or when you calculate every single frame, can it still keep up with the real time? Obviously, of course, it's not a good gauge, right? It also depends on how heavy your Maya scene is. So if your Maya scene is very heavy, even the best computer has problems keeping up as well. Okay, but this is just a small hack lah, right? If you want to check. Okay, so the moment you adjust 30 frames per second, you notice some very strange thing that happened. You are selecting 1.25. You are like right in the middle of a frame. Okay, and this is very bad for animation because you don't want to animate at point something. And then when you bring to Unity, right, Unity is not able to detect the in-between. That means between each frame, right, the center part, the 0 point something, it doesn't know what you want. So we must make sure that this one is reset to 1. Okay, and remember to move your selection so it goes to 1 as well. Alright, so we want a keyframe on every frame itself, not between the frames. And of course, the time that it happens, right, this kind of thing happens when you change your FPS and also when you scale your timing. For example, you take your entire animation and you say, I want to speed up the animation, right? So you take the whole animation and you scale it down. So what happens is all the frames inside, some of them will end up in the middle of each other frame. They'll get like point something each because you squash it down. So that is when you're going to get issues. So be very careful when you scale your animation, right? There is a way to snap it back to the proper time. But then of course it will mess up your overall timing, alright? So take note of that when you scale. And another thing is that when you animate, right, later on when we look at the curve, make sure your curve is smooth. If there's any let's say there's any wonkiness between 4 and 5, like keyframe 4, keyframe 5, there's some weird curve, right? But 4 and 5, when you play it, it looks normal. But in your curve, there's some weird curve. That's why you need to take note, because when you bring to Sketchfab is baking the animation by 0.2, not by keyframe, okay, by 0.2. So anything that's in between, right, is gonna notice. So if you have that weird curve, you notice that in Sketchfab, your hand also will just suddenly jerk. So that is another thing. Okay, so take note, make sure your keyframes are on the action numbers, and make sure that your curve is perfectly smooth, even though you can't really see it in Maya itself. Okay, so let's start setting keyframes. So first keyframe, I'm going to take everything, including the geometry. So you can click and drag, but you notice that it doesn't seem to select the first two for some reason. So I would like to change my constraints. Okay, so all objects turn off, so you can't select anything. Alright, and then choose controller and choose geometry on top. You need to expand your arrow, so if you can't see, right, it's probably hidden in the arrows. So open it up and click on the down arrow, all object off, and choose the controller and the geometry. So now when you click and drag, right, everything gets selected properly. Okay, so click and drag, select everybody, go to frame 1 and press the what key? S. Very good. So S. Now we are setting our very first keyframe. Okay, why am I setting keyframe on every single object, even though I'm not animating them yet? The reason is because we are using something called auto key, and auto key will automatically set keyframe for any new change, but it must first have a keyframe. In other words, you must key it first, and then whatever subsequent change you add to it, right, auto key will know that you want to make changes to the keyframe. But if you haven't set the first keyframe, auto key will think that you are not animating it at all. Alright, so make sure everything gets selected, keyframe. Now let's go to frame 5. And first thing is anticipation, right? Is the squash, right? So I'm going to just set keyframe again as it stays where it is on the ground. We don't care about the squash and stretch and the tail yet. Okay, let's just key the main path of action. So first frame, 5th frame. Okay, now let's go to 10. 10 is when you jump, right? So let's pull the arrow. Remember this arrow here? Let's pull it up. Okay. And let's set a keyframe. So select everybody, press S. So keyframe 1 is neutral position, resting position. Keyframe 5 is anticipation. Alright. Keyframe 10 is the highest point. Let's go to 15. 15 is landing. So you can like move it down and keyframe again. But remember, if you can copy, right? Don't set everything again. So copy and paste. How do you copy and paste? Okay, let's talk about how to select first. Alright. So if let's say you have set a keyframe wrongly, in a wrong place or totally wrong, how do you select the keyframe? Shift and click. So shift click selects the keyframe, right? By clicking and dragging, you're scrubbing. Alright, you're scrubbing to see the animation. See that? So dragging is scrubbing so you can see the animation. So in order to select, right, you need to add a shift. So shift, click, it turns it red, it's selecting it, so you can move it around. Alright, so if you set it in the wrong place, you can adjust. If you want to delete, you can right click, delete.
You can't just press backspace.
No, if you try back, yeah, I had your thought also. If you try backspace, right, you delete your stuff in the scene. Okay, so you have to right click, delete your keyframe itself, not your object. Okay, so if you want to select multiple keyframe, right? Shift, drag. So instead of clicking, you are dragging. That's all. Okay, so simple. So that's how you delete stuff and move stuff. I kind of forgot my train of thought, what exactly I want to tell you guys before I talk about this. But yes, that's how you select things. Oh yes, how do you copy? You can obviously shift click and copy, and then choose a keyframe and right click paste, right? So you can do the right click way, fine, but it's a little bit slow. So what I can do to copy this anticipation, remember, neutral, anticipation, jump. When you land, it's a squash again, right? Before you recover to your neutral. So the squash, where's my, okay, let's go to mail and look at the reference there I put up. So you can use the reference as a guide for your keyframe if you forget like what you're supposed to do or you're confused with the keyframes. So obviously for me, I'm very rusty, so I will actually look at all these templates and follow. Okay, so you can see when you squash, oh, this is bad. Okay, let's look at bouncing ball. Okay, so we have the squash, stretch, highest position, stretch down to squash. Then you kind of recover, right? So we have one more squash to do. So we want to copy the squash over when it lands. So what I usually do is I will go to frame 5. I will middle mouse, drag. Do you see that when you drag?
Middle mouse?
Yes, your scroll wheel. When you drag with your middle mouse, your action did not move, right? You see that when you scrub, it moves. But when you middle mouse drag, it stays in position. So that is a perfect way, right, to freeze your animation for that time and copy it. Okay, again, so scrubbing it is going to cause it to play. But if you go to frame 5, middle mouse drag to 15, you have that same position, right? You can select everybody and press S. You are copying that animation. Then you do the copy paste, the copy paste. Yeah. Make sure you select everybody first. Okay, so guys, middle mouse. You make sure you go to the frame that you want to copy, middle mouse, drag it over to 15, and then keyframe. So that's how you get your last position. And the resting position is the same, right? So for now it's the same. So I just go to 20 and keyframe. So we should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 different positions. Neutral, anticipation, not done yet. Jump, anticipation, the squash, and then back to relaxed position. Okay, so 2 of the same guy, 2 on the floor, 1 in the sky, 2 more on the floor. Got it? And then can you all save your work? Next, what we're going to do is to focus on the body itself. So the tail, right, is a part where it gets pulled along like hair. So it has no mind of its own, okay? The body itself is the brain, right? In our case, we got no head. So the body is the brain. We want it to lead the action. So let's select our body. And the first thing we want to do is squash, correct? Neutral. Frame 5 will be squash. So when you want to move between keyframes, right, you don't have to drag. There's actually some controllers here. See that? So you can move between the keyframes with the orange key. So you can jump to keyframe to keyframe. So you don't need to like aim your keyframe and look for it. especially when it's very tight, right? It's all very close together. You might not be able to see your next keyframe. Okay, so I'm going to move to frame 5 and I want to do a squash. So let's do a squash. Oh, before we do that, let's set auto keyframe so that whatever changes we make, right, it gets recorded. So auto keyframe is right beside the running man here. So turn that on. And remember, when you're no longer animating, right, or you're testing out things, remember to turn it off because it records all your actions. So in other words, right, let's say I'm in frame 7. Don't try this, okay? I'm in frame 7. I decide to move my disc. You notice it set a keyframe on 7?
Oh no.
Yeah, so whatever changes you make, right, it will record. As long as it already has some keyframe, right, it will record your action. Okay, so back in frame 5, I'm gonna squash down, okay? And if you squash, you usually squash on the floor, right? Not on the, like, in the middle. So I want to move my squash downwards towards the floor. So -2. In the y-axis, -2. Okay, you can adjust the squash a little bit more. You don't have to do it like so crazy like this, okay? It's not realistic. Alright, this kind of squash is when it has to jump like super duper high or it fell from super duper high heights. The amount of squash is dependent on how far it travels. So I don't think I jumped that much. Yeah, so I don't need that much of a squash. There's a select the name and then left, then middle mouse drag. Don't have middle mouse, right? Key in the number yourself. Okay, so squash, and then when it goes up, it's normal, right? When it goes up, it recovers its position if you refer to your ball jumping. The thing about 3D, right, is that because it's not 2D where you can quickly sketch out like an overview like this, after a while you tend to get confused and you forget what your key pose is. So it's very important either to have a visual reference of your own acting or you have like a drawn version like this as a guide. Okay, so, and you can use anything, like if you're animating any character, right, you can always use like the fundamentals, the ball, the seaweed, the pendulum, because the principles is always the same. It's just a different part that you're looking at. Okay, so same thing, the squash and stretch that we want to look at is from the bouncing ball, right? So that's our principle that we want to have a view. So every time it hits the floor is the flattest, but when it bounces up, it's very nice and circular. It goes back to its shape. Okay, it's a time in space whereby no gravity. It's kind of like no gravity was affecting it. It was like floating in space, and then it comes down again. Right? It's that kind of idea. So nothing. Let's go to frame 15. Now frame 15 is when it lands, right? It's a squash again, correct? So once again, we don't want to create our own. We just copy. So select everybody, middle mouse drag, press S. Okay, so Nigel, for you, you need to copy, paste. Shift, you need to shift click first, okay, to select, copy, paste. Yeah. Okay, guys, so you notice that it gets confusing, right, after a while? So by setting at fixed intervals, you actually can help your brain work a little bit better, okay? By saying that, okay, now at this point, at these fixed points, this is what's happening. But the moment you add timing to it and you try to animate at the same time, it's too many things for you to think about. So this is the first thing that we want to do. Okay, so quickly save your work. So the next thing that we want to do, the in-between, right? The in-between, we're not going to care, okay? All these things in between, ignore for now. Only the key pose. So next thing that we want to do is the tail, because we want to pose the whole thing, especially if you're doing walking, right? You want to pose your entire character, the hands, the legs, everything. Get the key pose correct. Alright, so for the squirrel, when your character is at its highest point here, the tail is at its lowest point, right? It gets dragged up. And then when your character is at its lowest point, your tail is the opposite, it's at its highest, because it's still coming down. So it's a late action, and therefore you get like the S. Okay, when it goes, the body is down, the tail is up, it's an S shape. Body up, tail down. Alright, so that is how you combine your seaweed and the body together. So let's do the same thing. Let's go to the highest, alright, the easiest one. When it's at its highest, my tail comes down. So I want to move the first one on its own. And then I'm going to select 1, 2, 3, the last 3, and curl them together. See that? Remember the first one is problematic, right? So you want to curl the first one, and then you rotate the last 3 together to get a nice curve. So all 3 will have the same value. So this is frame number 1. You might want to check the pose to see if it is what you want here. Okay, so something like that. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can adjust it later. This is just blocking, okay? So 1, 2, 3, curl it down. When it's at its lowest, when it landed, okay, you want to curl it up, right? So take your circle, bend it up, then bend the last 3 together. So it's faster that way. You might not even want to curl the start so much, okay, just a little bit will do. So the blocking stage should not take you too long, okay? You want to spend most of your effort in refining your animation. So we're going to keep this short. So you can see this very weird, like noodle-like character. Okay, so you might want to copy your animation over from this frame 15 to the anticipation of frame 5. So it has neutral, anticipation, jump, land. Last one, neutral, you might want to set the tail as up. Okay, as a kind of like neutral curl. So I didn't move my first one, I just moved my last 3. Okay, copy and paste on frame 20. So essentially, you should have something like this. Okay, so we're going to adjust the timing of our animation. Now it's at fixed time. So let's just look at, let's analyze, alright? So the jump is a little bit too fast, right? So we want it to kind of hang in mid-air. So you could extend it. So for example, if you act, right, and you try and jump with your anticipation, you'll take roughly around about 2 seconds, around there. 1,000, 2,000, right? It's around, it's around 2 seconds in total. So you should have around frame 60 to work from. In fact, just like what I was talking about earlier, in animation, right, you have to work within fixed timing. So your director will tell you, okay, your character is going to swing the sword in 60 seconds. So that's all you have to work with. and that's what you have to do. Right, so, oh yeah, 2 seconds, so that is 100 and, no, that's 60, correct. Okay, so let's set our very last keyframe to 61 outside of the whole animation. Okay, so our last keyframe, the landing position, right, we want to set it at, no, we want to set it a bit earlier because we want him to rest for a bit before he do the next jump. Correct? He's supposed to stay still. So, okay, let's leave it at 61 and then let's copy the same keyframe to maybe, let's let him rest for 51. Okay, so from 51 to 61, right, he is resting. Okay, and our animation obviously end on 60. So when you play back, right, it's going to loop very nicely. So how you do loop animation is something like that. Your first frame and your last frame, which is totally outside of your range, right? Just nice outside the range. That one is the exact same keyframe. Okay, so it will loop very nicely back to 1. Very nicely back to 1. Alright, in our case, we stop at 51 and hold it there because we want him to rest a little bit before he do the next jump. So if you play back your animation, you rest and okay, and then you will jump again. Alright, so of course you can shift your rest, so you can shift him to be a little bit earlier, and maybe the jump can be somewhere in the middle. Right, so at this point in time, you're not really working with exact numbers. It's based on your judgment. Alright, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, something around there. Okay, so somewhere in the middle is where he jumps. Obviously, you want to choose the best like hang time. So I have really bad timing now. You can maybe give him a bit more like anticipation time, okay, before he jumps. You can even give him a bit more neutral time, in fact, okay, so he can have a resting position at the start here. So he's resting for 5 frames and then he anticipates for the next 5 frames and then he jumps and then maybe he rests again. Okay, so he can rest for 5 frames, anticipate for another 5 frames, then he jumps, right? Jumps somewhere in the middle, of course. And then after that, he lands, right? So he lands as a squash. And then 5 frames later, he rests for another 5 frames. Also can, okay? So in total, right, he rested for like 10 frames. So it could be something like that. We could like shorten the time even more later on. Now there's something wrong with this jump. In that, yes, he is resting, then he anticipates and jump. Maybe you might even want to give him more anticipation time. I don't know, it's up to you. But his jumping, right, is a little bit too regular, don't you think so? Like it's like slowly going up, then slow down again, then slowly coming down, and then slow down again to a stop. So there's this like ease in and ease out kind of feeling that we want to get rid of. If we have a jump, right? You look at your bouncing ball. You can see there's a hang time on top. But at the bottom, when it hits the ground and when it takes off, right, it's very fast. Remember your animation principle? There's very few frames at the start and the end of the jump. Very, very few. Everything is in the top the hang time. In fact, if you think about roller coaster, right, it's exactly the same way. When you go down, it's very fast, right? And then when you do a 360 when you're up there, the roller coaster hangs for a while and then it goes whoosh down again. So that kind of whoosh up, hangs, whoosh down is the same idea for your bouncing ball. It goes down very fast, it goes up very, very fast. So that's the idea. So remember this shape. We're going to do the same for our graph editor. So our previous lesson on animation for turntable, we open up the graph editor to look at the lines, right? The curves. So it can be found under Window, Animators, Editor. Okay, but we're going to do it slightly different today. We're going to change the layout of our view. Alright, so we're going to have like a 2-panel version. On top is going to be our perspective. Below is going to be your graph. So under your panels here, you're going to change how this panel look like. So under the panels, there's saved layouts. We want to choose the layout called perspective and graph. Okay, panels, saved layouts, perspective and graph. So once you click on that, your window gets split in two and you get the top and bottom to work with. Of course, you can change the divider. Alright, you can kind of slide it up and down.
Perspective and hypergraph?
No, perspective, graph. Okay, so saved layouts, perspective, graph. Now, if you find that your screen is very tiny, you do not have much screen real estate, right? You might not want to do the split screen. You might want to open it as a separate window here. Okay, so all the separate windows are found under the Windows menu set. So it's up to you which version you prefer to work with. So for me, I'm okay with the split screen, so I'll just do that. And remember, if you space bar on the panel, you can maximize it. Right? So you can also work with it that way, like that. Now, graph editor. Graph editor is a place to look at your animation in curves and therefore understand the ease in and the ease out. Okay, the changes in timing. Just like how we do our turntable was not constant, right? In speed, it was kind of like slowing down, and speeding up. So when we make the line straight, it became very constant. So now for character animation, we want our lines to be curvy, so it has the change in timing. Okay, so how graph editor works, just to refresh your memory, whatever you select, right, is going to show up in your graph editor. So if there's animation, you're going to see the graph. Okay, so if I click on my arrow, you're going to see my arrows animation. Correct? And let's look at all the different channels. So we have multiple colors here. We've got translate X, which is a straight line because no changes in value, right? Translate Y is when your ball goes up and down. Correct? Translate Z, again, no changes in position, so straight line. Rotate, nothing, right? So how do you read the graph? This is the timing horizontally. Vertically is the value. So depending, okay, if X has a value of positive, it will go up. Negative, it will come down. So in our case, there's no animation there, so it's flat line. So this is our bounce, and just nice, the positive Y is the direction of up. So we can actually see our entire arc right here, okay, exactly how it's being presented. So let's change our hang time. Let's make it hang in the air a bit longer, okay? So let's go to our tangent here and let's extend it. So to extend sideways without like changing the height, right? Hold down Shift. So Shift, click and drag. is going to extend the handles sideways. Right? Shift is like you constrain it to a horizontal or vertical direction. So horizontally, okay, change the time. Now let's look at our animation. Okay, so let's play. Do you see that? It hangs.
It's like gliding.
Yeah. Still a little bit weird, right? I mean, if it's short. Okay, let's go to no hang time. No hang time is like that. Alright? Very spiky kind of movement. If there's hang time,
Ooh.
right? Gives that anti-gravity kind of feeling. We haven't done the stretch yet, that's why it's looking a bit strange. Okay, but we will talk about the stretch later. We are talking about timing now. With our current key pose, how can we time it so it feels okay? Now there's a little bit of a delay when it begins to jump. That's because our curve, right, is not exactly angular. Can you see that? There's like a curve here, so there's a ease out, right? I think that's the word, ease out. Okay. I get confused between ease in and ease out, but either one of them is, I think it's out. Ease out. Yeah, and then when you slow down, it's ease in. I don't know. Okay, anyway, this is slowly gaining speed. We want it to be directly speeding up. So we want to break the handle here, right? But when we break the handle, we move it, it tries to change the curve below.
This is giving me that.
Yeah, so we want to break it. No, this is shapes. Think about it as shapes. Your bouncing ball. Okay, so let's break this guy. And in order to break your handle, these are the buttons that we go to. Okay, so we've already roughly played around with these buttons here. Remember, this one changes the shape of your curve, right? It makes it angular. Oh, actually, you can even use this. Oh no, okay. If you want your lines to be angular, right? Remember, for turntable, we make it straight like that. Correct? So that is like straight movement without changes in time. Okay, so all these buttons here controls how your spline works. Okay, you can even have flat spline. But what we want to do is to alter the handle itself. So the handles are found here, these 4 little buttons here. So the first one we want to press is to break the handle. Right now it's joined together, right? So we want to break them. So select your keyframe, this one. And then we want to, we want to break the handle here. Okay, we want to break the handle here. So now, when you move one side, the other handle stays flat. Okay, so it's very cool. We can change the bounce. Let me give it a bit more hang time again. Okay, the other one, we want to break it as well, right? So again, select your keyframe, break the handle, and move it up. If you feel that your keyframe is not exactly in the middle, you want to move it, right? You can always shift, hold down shift, click and drag sideways.
Yes.
Alright? Shift is to constrain the movement. So we don't want to change the value. We just want to change the time. So we can kind of move it sideways to centralize that curve visually. So it's very hard to see in your timeline, right? Whether it's in the middle or not. I think the best way is actually to look at the curve. Now, okay, so when you play your animation, you can see a very nice hang time. And very direct. It's a little bit slow. So if you feel that it's too slow, right? You might want to adjust your animation. And I noticed when I shift my keyframes, the rest of my keys, I forgot to shift them as well. So it's kind of offset. See, it's kind of offset from the rest of them. So you might want to shift the rest together as well. So if you want to shorten the timing, right, you can kind of select everybody. I don't want to show you guys how to scale it because scaling it is going to cause it to become 0 point something. And even after you snap it to the nearest keyframe, right, sometimes it might screw up with your timing. So the best I would suggest is actually to move it manually if you can. So right now I'm actually selecting everything I have in my scene and just moving them together as one. Okay, now some of you might notice that your curves are very flat, right? You cannot really see much. Like for example, let me see if I can zoom in such a way that, yes. Some of you are seeing something like this, correct? Nothing much to see. So how do you see the full extent of your curve? If you press the F key, F for framing, okay, it will frame all your channels. So depending on what channel you select, like for example, rotate Y, just press F and it will frame it properly. It's the same for selecting your object in your scene. If you want to focus on it, just press F and you'll focus on your selection. And when you rotate, right, it will rotate around the selection as well. Same thing, F, it will rotate around the selection. Okay, and if you select nothing, F, it will zoom out and select and kind of rotate around your object. Okay, so F is your friend even in modeling. You want to just focus on certain parts of your model to rotate around it, just press F. Even for your curve, you can't see anything, press F and it will focus on your animation. Right? Okay, now make sure you check your key pose after adjusting. I think I have some weird offset here that I didn't do it properly. So when I was adjusting stuff, some things get shifted somehow. So you might want to kind of adjust them back. Okay, our goal this time is to find the sweet spot for the timing. We want to make sure that it looks natural. So mine right now is very slow. So again, you can adjust everybody. It's fine if you want to work in the timeline, okay? So usually the graph editor is more for adjusting like the curve itself, the ease in, ease out. Other than that, right, usually I adjust my timing in the timeline. So personal preference, okay? See what is the thing that works well for you. So I might shorten everything up to here. Okay, so after you're done with your animation, what we're going to do next is to put in the stretch. So we've already adjusted the time. You can fine tune it in a while, right? So let's do the stretching and let's see what happens. So at this point in time, okay, let's look at our template again. Squash, immediately it stretches, right? And of course, when it comes down, it stretches even more. If you observe carefully, there's even more stretch here. Yeah. Actually, it's stretching more because, right? Oh yeah, that's true. Increase speed. So, kind of stretch more. So let's do our very first stretch from Maya. So let's look for keyframe. Okay, mine is at 12. And once it stretches, immediately you want to, once it squash, when it leaves the ground, you want to stretch it, right? But it's a little bit too high. Can you see that? From here to here, it's kind of extreme. Okay, so we might want to bring it down a little bit. So sometimes, even though you do the curve already, right, you might want to still adjust the position to your liking. Okay, so I want to bring it down a little bit lower. So I'm going to take the arrow and bring it down. And then I want to take the disc and I want to stretch. Okay, make sure the stretch is kind of realistic in relationship to the squash. How much it squashes, right, is how much it should stretch. Okay, so it shouldn't be like super stretch when it's not squashed that much. Relative, okay, so it should be roughly around the same. I actually pull the whole object down a little bit, so it's a bit closer to the ground. Okay, can you see that now? It looks a little bit better, right? It's squashing there for some reason. Oh, I think it's due to the position of the, yeah, it's due to the position of the disc. So we will adjust that later. Alright, so let's focus on the front part. It is kind of working okay. The back part is a bit weird. So do the same for the back, alright? So one frame before it lands. Over here, so 28 is my landing. So at 27, I want to stretch more due to the speed. And obviously, should we bring it down? Yeah, we should bring it down, right? In fact, we should bring it down closer to the ground. And the first one should be a bit higher. See that? So this is a bit higher. This is a bit lower. So go back to Maya. Bring the arrow down a bit closer. So you notice they are not exact copies of each other. So this one could be higher actually. And now let's play. If you find the controllers very distracting, right, you can turn them off on playback. Okay, so I'm gonna leave the rest of the tail for you to work on. So focus on the S shape. So far we're only doing the C curve for your seaweed. Remember your seaweed has this snapping. So it has the S shape, right, before it snaps. So it slowly bends joint by joint. Every joint is moving later than the other. So you want to try and keyframe where the S shape will appear. The S shape will appear when your character is at the squash position. You can actually do the S shape, and then at the takeoff can be the U shape. So you want to look at how the tail moves over here. Use that as a guide for the seaweed. Right? So you see this? It actually has the movement clock up, written up for you already. So study that and see how the seaweed works for your tail. I think actually our keyframe for the landing is, oh yeah, it's correct, yeah. So focus on the S shape in the middle somewhere. Alright, get it right. And last thing that I want to talk about before you guys continue your work, right? How do you offset your tail? Remember, your tail always moves a little bit slower than your body, correct? So the last three controllers of your tail, right, is going to follow a little bit slower. So what you can do is to move them in your graph editor. Okay, so you can select the three circles, select all your keyframes, and then hold down shift and move it one or two keyframes later. See that? In fact, just one keyframe will do, and then you get that offset kind of feeling. You don't want offset to be too obvious also, so it's just a little bit only. And that's how you actually offset the timing of your tail. Do that as the final pass. So do your seaweed first. Once you're done with all the timing of a seaweed, shift everybody one frame down and you're done.